So what you're here to see is a joint webinar between Proba, Corporate Value Associates, and the International Insetting Platform. Today we're going to be looking into insetting, the role of insetting and fertilizers in reducing agri-food industry emissions. Now, one thing I'd like to quickly mention is that the meeting will be recorded and the slides will be shared post the event, so please keep your eyes on your inbox for that afterwards. So one thing I'd like to say is that we're going to have a lot of things that we're going to cover, which I'm super duper excited about. And we do want to encourage people to please ask your questions. Because we are using Google Meet, you can do this by clicking on the activities icon at the bottom right of the Google Meet screen and putting your questions into the Q&A bit. At the end of the webinar, we'll try to allocate about 5 to 10 minutes to answer your questions. You can submit these anonymously too, but you can also leave your name. If you have something that you definitely want to be answered, you could also email us, but we can also follow up with you post-webinar. Now, I'd like to show you our speakers. We have 3 fantastic speakers joining us today. We're going to start off with Benjamin from Corporate Value Associates. We're fantastic partners with them. We're really excited about what they're going to share. We also have Nicole joining us representing International Platform of Insetting. And lastly, we also have our CEO and co-founder of Proba, who's sitting right next to me. And on that note, I would really like to pass on the stage to Benjamin.
Thanks a lot, Erna. I hope everybody can hear me well. So very happy to participate to this session. So the objective for me is to do a bit the introduction and to talk about the decarbonization overall of the agri-food industry and the importance of low carbon fertilization. So meaning low carbon fertilizers, but plenty of other levers that are sometimes not well known, but that can substantially contribute, I would say, to the decarbonization journey of many of the companies involved in this chain. On the next slide, Anna, we have just a very quick summary of what I'm going to discuss. I'll try to be quick, but I think it's a good opportunity to present a bit CVA and who we are and what we do. But then moving on to the, I would say a bit the scope of the discussion and the key level. So CVA, it's a strategy consulting firm with different, I would say, industrial expertise, but a very important knowledge on the agri-nutrient sector. We've been created more than 35 years ago and with offices throughout the globe. On the next slide, we have a specific presentation of what we call our agri-nutrients platform. So for close to 30 years. So I wasn't here at the beginning, but we've worked a lot in the fertilizer industry and in the end throughout the value chain. So working with all kind of players. So from the key producers, phosphate, nitrogen, potash fertilizers, down to the food industry. So covering all types of products, of course, mineral fertilizers, but also organic fertilizer, low carbon, biostimulants. And trying to be really pioneers in industry trends, so trying to understand what will be driving the industry in the next 5 to 10 years, and hence our, I would say, focus today on decarbonization and low carbon fertilization, which we believe will be a very important driver for both the agri and the food industry in the long term. And as I mentioned, we have a very global footprint. So I'm based in Europe, but we work a lot in Africa, in Asia, in the Middle East, in the US, in South America. So trying to be as global as possible. And on the next slide, it's again, I'll try to go quickly, but just to show a bit an overview of the key partners and companies we work with. So again, from a fertilizer production down to the really agri and food ecosystem, food producers, food distributors. We have really a transversal, I would say, expertise on the value chain, which we believe is really critical to have in order to understand, I would say, the stakes related to decarbonization of the agri-food industry through more sustainable fertilization. Putting aside a bit CVA, now on the next slide, I want to start discussing a bit more about the core of the topic today, which is really decarbonization. And it's important to highlight that fertilizer, and more precisely nitrogen fertilizers, they currently represent around 5% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, which is obviously a lot, and not always very well understood by all the players throughout the value chain. A big part of these emissions, a third approximately, comes from the production. So as producing, ammonia, gray ammonia, and converting it into nitrogen fertilizers. But the biggest part, and 60% approximately of these emissions, come from the usage of the product. Meaning, when you apply fertilizer in the field, there will be emissions, and this is the biggest part, I would say, of the greenhouse gas emission caused by fertilizers. Meaning, production is important, and we talk a lot about green ammonia, green fertilizers. It's very, very important, but many other levels exist, and they are not always well known and well understood regarding their decarbonization potential. If we move to the next slide, just to show as an illustration, if we take the example of a farmer, fertilizers represent 50% of their emissions, meaning using their tractors or their equipment or fuel is very minimal compared to what fertilizers represent. And fertilizers today play a central role in the yield farmers are able to get, but they are also central in the amount of GHG emissions they generate. So it's the number one focus at farm level that we should have if we want to decarbonize the agri-food industry. So very important also to have this in mind. On the next slide, just to put a bit of context, so fertilizer used to be a very, I would say, farmer-focused topic, or really players on the upstream parts, I would say, of the value chain. But today, with the stakes related to carbon and GHG emissions, we realize that CPGs are at the core of the topic and at the core of the discussion, meaning that they are now getting more and more interested in fertilizer, while it was really more than a secondary topic for them. And they have strong commitments in terms of reducing their carbon emissions, with quite frequently targets by 2030, which is very, very soon. So reducing by 20% or more their scope 3 emission. But some of them are even stronger ambition, with the ambition to be net zero by 2050. So fertilizers and the emissions related to the production and the use of fertilizers can play a central role in achieving these targets, which are quite ambitious. And today, I think it's around half of the companies don't always know how they will be able to achieve this target. So it's very important, and it's driven by two dimensions. Consumers, so us, when we buy our groceries, of course, more than 70 or 80% of the population is really concerned about this topic and are willing to buy, I would say, more sustainable products. And it's also driven by regulation. So carbon will be increasingly regulated. So it's putting additional pressure on these consumer packaged good companies or fast-moving goods companies that will be exposed to additional taxes or more I would say restrictive regulation on their emissions. On the next slide, we've tried to make it very concrete. I mean, when you pay for a baguette in France, for instance, what is the carbon footprint attached to this? For bread, it's 50% of the emissions come from fertilization, which is half, and it's a huge amount. But for everything that you consume on a daily basis, if you take potatoes, we've done the analysis for a kilogram of French fries, it will be around 30%. For coffee, it's around 40%. So the share is really substantial, meaning that the decarbonization potential is substantial if you use the right decarbonization levels. And of course, it can be costly, but if you take a broader perspective and you look at the cost increment by product, it's generally less than 1% of cost addition to decarbonize substantially the footprints for each of these products. So quite interesting to see that it's feasible, it's potentially high impact, but it's today not always understood, or at least not prioritized, because perceived as the responsibility of the farmers or the fertilizer producers. So very important in our view to have this in mind, because all players have a role to play in this value chain. Some partnerships have started to emerge, and I think that's what we have on the next slide. So big CPGs are trying to develop partnerships either with cooperatives, with farmers, developing new pilots for more sustainable farming practices, but it's generally at a pilot level at this stage, and limited in terms of impact. There is a lot of communication, which is important to have. There is a lot of pilot, which is good to start with, but it's not yet scaled, and that's the ambition that I think all of these companies should have. It's to be able to decarbonize their value chain at scale, and for that they need to identify, quantify, and implement the right levels. It's something that we have tried to do. So on this slide, you can see it's a non-exhaustive list, but a list of concrete, tangible, and already available in markets carbon emission reduction levels that can be used. The first, it's low carbon fertilizers. So using green or blue ammonia to produce green fertilizers. You have plenty of projects that are emerging in France, in the US, in Brazil. So this is coming into the market. So meaning that the products will be available soon in order to be used by the farmers. You have then plenty of I would say modification of existing products that can help decarbonize the use phase. So the low carbon fertilizer helps decarbonize the upstream part, so the 30% that I mentioned at the beginning. And then you have other levels that can help you reduce the emission at the use phase of the product. So it reduces the ammonia volatilization or the nitrous oxide emission. For instance, you can use stabilized nitrogen fertilizer. So it's already quite well established in the market with inhibitors, urease inhibitor or nitrification inhibitors. We can really substantially reduce the emissions of the nitrogen fertilizers. You can use additives with fertilizer with sulfur or biostimulants to limit also the emissions of the 1 ton of fertilizer in the field. You can also use there are different nitrogen fertilizers that exist in the market. Some are less emitting than others. For instance, calcium ammonium nitrate is a more sustainable solution than urea, for instance. So you can also play on that, or think more globally on your farming practices and implementing I would say practices that will help retain the carbon in the soil, using precision agriculture, rotation of crops, or using cover crops in your field to help carbon being retained on the field. In the end, plenty of levers that exist. Most of them can be implemented today, sometimes at a very limited cost for substantial impact. So there are plenty of levers that exist. And the question now is how to implement it and how to make it quantifiable, I would say, for the farmer, but also for all the players in the value chain downstream. And we believe that food companies or food retailers have a significant role to play, which is very new in the fertilizer industry. They have a role to play to really guide the specifications and guide farmers and all the upstream value chains toward these practices that are more sustainable and potentially help finance this additional cost that will help farmers make the decision. So we believe that the food companies have a real role to play in order to influence this trend and accelerate this trend. Doesn't mean that the upstream part does not have any role to play. Cooperatives, they play a central role in the logistics and giving access to the farmer to a more sustainable solution, so they will keep this role to play. Farmers also have an important role to play because in the end they make the purchasing decision, so they need to be aware, but they need also the right support in order to make this change happen. And then fertilizer producers need also to find ways to decarbonize their production, either using new sources of green or blue ammonia, or investing in upgrading their own production facilities to decarbonize. So again, plenty of solutions that exist, and not all of them are being implemented. So a high potential, I would say, for decarbonization. And so, as a conclusion, it's what CVA can do, and how can we help. And so we are building this partnership with Proba because we have a strong conviction that we can help and accelerate the decarbonization of the industry. It's achievable, it can be implemented quickly, and there are really important opportunities that could be not very costly. And I think that's very important because it's generally a big break. It's how much will it cost? There are multiple levels with different economic profiles. So that's what we can help companies go through. What we can do, it's really map all the carbon emission reduction levels that exist for specific companies. So through the list that we shared, but it's not exhaustive, and there are many other levels that exist. Trying to quantify what would be the impact, what would be the cost of each of the levels, so that you can have a clear view of the euro per ton CO2 ratio that each initiative can generate. And then it's helping on the implementation, and that's where our partnership with Proba is really valuable, is that we can help implement and certify those carbon abatement levels, so that at farm level and for all the downstream value chain, there is a proof that the levels that have been implemented help decarbonize the value chain. So that it's not just a promise; it's fact-based, that there is, I would say, results on what has been done in the field. And then beyond that, we believe that there will be opportunities to monetize and to create value from this decarbonization. So there are a lot of discussion about carbon credits that can be a lever, but we believe also that at some point, and for specific customers, there will be an opportunity to potentially value this low carbon product to the end consumer, and show that this is so that it can be a sustainable choice that is made by the consumer when they choose, I don't know, low carbon beer as it's starting to emerge, or low carbon potatoes. So that's where we believe we can play a substantial role, and we believe, and I think the Proba team believes also, that we can have a substantial impact on the industry.
Thank you so much, Benjamin. That was fantastic. It was a great way to show that there's a lot of opportunities for decarbonization. And the reason why we also chose Nicole to join us is because we believe that Insetting is a huge part of this. And now I'd like to give the stage to Nicole.
Thank you, Erna. Great. So maybe just very quickly about IPI and why are we here. If you can move, Erna. So my name is Nicole. I'm the chair of the technical committee at the International Platform for Insetting, which is an advisory body to the executive board. We are a membership-based organization. So here you see a bunch of colorful logos. We have both companies, NGOs, and sort of technology or service providers who create the ecosystem of our members. And our main role is to foster capacity building at a really practitioner level. So we have a Insetting Academy where we organize trainings, and we also engage in best practice sharing and advocacy work for more Insetting. Having said that, you might wonder what Insetting is, and Benjamin already made a great case for it. I will expand then. Insetting means basically creating both carbon reduction and removals along supply chains or value chains, while at the same time creating other benefits. You see here an example of a landscape, and let's take the fertilizer example. So let's say you're reducing greenhouse gas emissions from production of fertilizer in factories by using green energy or blue energy. But at the same time, if you embark on a reduction of synthetic fertilizer, because the fertilizer will be still synthetic, even if you produce it with green energy, you're creating other benefits so on soil health, biodiversity in soil. You're saving the farmer's pocket, because that's what we have seen during COVID. A lot of farmers simply stopped buying fertilizers. So some of the changes within the industry might also be externally induced. And I will now just quickly outline the differences between insetting and offsetting, because that's a question we often get. So while insetting really means that you're creating both climate and, in a broader sense, nature and social impact within an existing value supply chain. Offsetting means that you're not really changing the way you or your suppliers do business. So that will be, in a very nutshell, the simplest distinction. Insetting still might mean that you generate carbon credits, or that somebody generates carbon credits. So carbon credit is not a bad word, but there are other ways how to monitor, verify, and report on value chain benefits, and Sijran will speak more about that. One more thing, maybe insetting really means that a company or an organization is very likely more engaged than just buying credits off the counter. It will mean mostly that you're very engaged with your suppliers, that there is a longer term relationship, that it also means that those projects and programs are financed very differently than carbon credits. Because yes, it means basically long-term commitment. You can go next. Yeah, and how does insetting come to play? So there's already Benjamin outlined more or less. We really see that the biggest drive is from the public and then peer pressure by setting climate targets, be different targets. Today, science-based targets is the most publicly renowned platform, but there are also other ways. And secondly, and that ties really into what insetting is creating business value beyond decarbonization, which means farmer livelihoods, definitely. So it means that you're stabilizing your supplier base, very likely, if you're able to reduce costs. It also means that you're very likely long-term increasing productivity of land, because we know when we look into highly industrialized countries where fertilizer have been in place or used since the 70s, we see that the soil health is correspondingly not in a great shape. So we can move next. This is just an example of how does a insetting roadmap or roadmap, actually it's a quantifiable or quantified roadmap look like. This is Nestle's one. So it's there is a you have a baseline, you have you should have a very good idea of where you're going, short term, mid-term, and long term, and have milestones along the way of how you're getting there. I think that the Nestle's roadmap has taken like 2 years to quantify, and it covers actually all their crops and fertilizer, or reduction in fertilizer, and switch to green fertilizer is one of the interventions. We through a couple of sort of reports we have published in recent months or years. Obviously, the biggest question is who pays for this, and how does funding flow into insetting initiatives. We see different approaches. This is just a highlight of what it could be. The basic ones and all these ones are simply CSR and marketing budgets, but we see also approaches where there is a green or sustainability premium on products. And we also more and more see approaches where procurement is directly involved in setting projects and initiatives because of the sort of direct business business case and business advantage for a company. Yeah, and of course you might ask how is this measured, because that's a second obstacle most companies and our stakeholders ask. So how do I measure this? How do I verify this? Do I have to verify? And with that, I will be happily handing over to Sijbrand. Thank you. Oh, I forgot about my question. So I wanted to get also some input from you who are silent on the line to understand what would you or your organization need to engage in setting. And this is a quick Slido. How is it called? The word cloud, right? So if you are able to get on Slido.com and just type in the number in, you don't need any registration, right? It's just very user friendly. No account. Yeah. And so, use a word or use 2 words to sort of, convey your message. And we should see slowly or soon something cool, right? Clients, yeah. So we have 7 people who have participated, and there are 73 on the line. So let's increase 8. Let's increase the number. Would be great to have more of you participating. Okay, now it's coming. Cool. Already engaging. That's good news. Everybody sees this, right, or not?
Yes, yeah. Everyone should be live as well.
Roba, fantastic. But yeah, it aligns with what we see as well. So we'll just maybe pick the biggest money and validation. That seems to be the key. So validation translates also to the proof and the verification. Raw materials. Okay, that's interesting. I have not yet heard that one before. Let's wait until we have 20, and then we can let them move on.
I think we had one more person put in their bit.
Yeah.
I think we have any more, but really great to see this. Really nice to interact. And wait, let's let that person finish typing what they need. Yeah.
Maybe we can take a screenshot and share it afterwards as well.
Of course. And I think actually a very nice transition into Sijbrand's parts. So, if I could just leave.
Hi everybody. Just checking that you can hear me okay. It looks like Erna is talking, but we're using the same microphone. So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Nicole, and thank you, Benjamin, for the excellent presentations, and thank you everybody for joining this. And Erna, thank you for proceeding to the next slide. So my name is Sijbrand Tielemans. I'm founder CEO of Proba, startup in the Insetting world in Amsterdam, Amstelveen. I'm CEO, so I'm going to talk about money. So not about fertilizers too much, just trying to make it very specific. So what the actual, I think, main obstacle is to get this all started and to get this all accelerated. So as I think Benjamin put very nicely, the fertilizer, it's like a big problem because lots of emissions, but also it holds a big promise, because we think it also is kind of a low cost, high impact, very scalable opportunity to achieve the reductions that we need basically in the agri and food supply chains. So although some people view it as I would say, a major issue, it also is a major opportunity to do something really quickly and also somewhat cost effectively. But then again, it's not for free. And I think that's why we're here, because Insetting basically is an instrument, and also Proba, where we deliver an instrument to share the cost, to make it affordable, and to speed up, I would say, the transition to this low carbon net zero economy. So let's try to dive into a specific example. So we are currently working with a large Dutch farmer cooperative. So they're in the middle of the supply chain. So they have thousands of farmers who own the cooperative, are member of the cooperative, but the cooperative basically sells the commodities, the agri commodities to the agri buyers, so the CPGs. So they have a good view on what is necessary to, one, convince the farmers that they change a bit, but also two, make sure they get a fair price for the lower carbon commodities. In this case, wheat, barley, and potatoes. So the baguette from Benjamin, but also the beer for Benjamin gets, I would say, a lower carbon version if we do something about the fertilizer emissions. So what are we? Again, this is the same slide I stole from Benjamin. 50% of the baguette and 20% of the beer, but also 30% of your potatoes. So this farmer cooperative is in the middle of the supply chain and wants to make sure, together with everybody, that we change and that we transition to lower carbon fertilizers. That's what comes next. Just some high level numbers. You can, I would say, debate me on the numbers, but I think the commodity price of a ton of wheat is around 250 euros on the global markets. It's a commodity. The average yield per hectare in the Netherlands, I think according to the EU, is 9.4 tons per hectare if we have a good growing season. And according to, I think, the Dutch emission factor authority, 1 ton of wheat represents 264 kilograms of CO2. So I'm not sure if it's entirely in line with the numbers of Benjamin, but anyway, lots of footprint if you produce wheat. And now we're going to decarbonize using technologies which are available today. So there's nothing really new here. The inhibitors, they reduce the in-field emissions, so the use phase, like Benjamin mentioned, the 60%, which happens on the farm. But you can also switch to a lower carbon fertilizer. So basically when the fertilizer is being created or it's using low carbon technologies, so green ammonia or blue ammonia based primarily, or switch to a fertilizer which has a coating around it in order to reduce also in-field emissions. So these are existing technologies. They're not for free. They cost a bit more than, let's say, your conventional urea, but still, I would say, available and somewhat affordable. If you go next. So for instance, if you would use inhibitors, so this is back of the envelope calculation, and as Proba, we're here to validate and verify that this is actually true. You can reduce the emissions with almost 10%. And it costs on, I would say, the level of the wheat, 1.56% extra to introduce this technology. I'm going to scare you people now, because if you would calculate this on a per ton of CO2 basis, then it comes up on around 150 euros per ton of CO2, which is expensive. But these are numbers, so that's the disclaimer, these are numbers based on a relatively small scale pilot. And I think that's my main message for today, is let's see if we can go beyond pilots, because then we will drive down prices significantly together. And we're sure that there's many, I would say, agricultural contexts where you can go to like 30 to 50 tons. But for this particular example, you're talking 150. If you go next, and again, this is low carbon CAN, so I would say a better fertilizer, but also produced in a low carbon way in the Netherlands. So the context is really, I would say, important again. It will reduce a lot of emissions again, but comes with quite a product premium at the moment. This depends a lot on where you buy or use the low carbon fertilizer, if it's available. So I think that's also what we want to achieve, is basically get all your money here today so we can, I would say, increase the production capacity of green produced fertilizers. If you go next, you will probably be even more shocked to see that a per ton of CO2 abatement cost is at the moment 275 euros. But then again, people are actually doing this at the moment already. So apparently there's pioneers here who are willing to pay for this. And basically, if you would start calculating what it actually means for one baguette or one croissant, Benjamin, it is actually, well, pretty insignificant. So I know we're in an economic situation where there's inflation, but I think we still can, I would say, afford 0.5% to decarbonize 10-20% of our bread. So I think if you go to this level, it's really cheap. So we should do more. Next. However, and that's, of course, it's not simple. So applying low carbon fertilizers on the field is simple because it doesn't require, I would say, practice change of the farmer, but producing it is not simple. And there's also other obstacles. So I think the main obstacle at the moment, and I think that's also our main message, is, okay, we need people in the room who want to pay for this, pay a little bit more money in order to get this change going. So if you go next, who's going to pay? Next, everybody's going to pay. So I think the slide of Benjamin saying that the food producers, the CPGs, probably they get most of the heat from the consumers and maybe also from, I would say, the public eye in order to supply us with low carbon potatoes, low carbon coffee, and low carbon beer. But I think in the end, all the participants in the supply chain will need to pay a bit of this, and of course we as consumers will also need to pay. And there's different capacities there and different, I would say, availability of capital, but it should be possible if we share the cost. And insetting is, I would say, outside regulation, a great way to share the cost. However, there's some other elephants are in the room as well. So just don't want to make it too simple. So if you go next, I think in the audience, my assumption is that people have been looking at this, but then maybe get confused, as we get confused as well, by the moving targets of the SBTi, so Science-Based Targets Initiative, but also Greenhouse Gas Protocol. So we're still, I would say, writing the rules as we go. So it takes some time, but I think we're going in the right direction. But we need to be patient and also a bit ambitious there, to maybe also write the rules ourselves a bit. If you go next. The other thing that's moving, but I think we're more or less already know where things are going, is that regulations will, I would say, become in place, specifically in Europe, but they have a global impact as well with for instance, CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. I think quite a few people in this meeting, in this webinar, will be aware and are making plans on how to deal with this. And if not, well, you can reach out to us. Next slide, please. I think something that we have noticed is, okay, we can have the best ideas, the best cost, and think we can execute on this. But maybe one of the first conversations that we need to have is actually with the accountants of the reporting companies, to make sure that if we do something, the investment that we do in our supply chain, which should reduce Scope 3 emissions, is actually will be supported by the accountants who make up the ESG and sustainability reports on a yearly basis. So that's important, I would say, advice from our side to start having these conversations quickly. Next, please. And this is, I think, our latest obstacle or elephant in the room is it's not simple. Also, because there's lots of, I would say, market mechanisms that come into play. So we talked about insets and insetting, but there's not one definition, unfortunately, of insetting. You can attach the attributes to the physical commodities, do it on a project basis. So again, many, I would say, alternatives here. So if you get confused, we would not be surprised. We are still learning as well. So it's not simple, unfortunately. However, and I think that's my final remarks, and hopefully everybody will then reach out to us with some Q&A, and I give the word to Erna again. Still, now what? Next slide, please. Well, unfortunately, we cannot wait. We cannot wait. You should also not wait. So I think we should all get into action mode. So that's my final message. There is a low-cost, high-impact solution available today. So that's why we, as Proba, pivoted into this fertilizer world, because we see if you go and do something here, it makes a real impact. So that this impact is available today. So we should not wait and do it right now. Technology is there, partnerships are there. I think there's many people in the webinar here, both from the upstream participants, fertilizer producers, I would say the commodity traders, the cooperatives, in the middle of the supply chains, but also from the food producers, the people who own the brands, who are willing to act. So well, let's do that. And next to some of your leadership, a bit of your money, I would think would make the ball rolling. So yeah, let's start yesterday. And if you have questions, I think we're opening up for questions right now. Thank you.
So thank you so much to all of our speakers. Thank you for attending and taking some time of your day to join us. I would like to now encourage you to add any questions. I see that we do not have any at the moment. That's all right. That's also okay. But I would still like to give a couple minutes to hand the floor over. If you have any questions, ask them now. If we don't, then we can also end this presentation. But thank you, Benjamin. Thank you, Nicole, for joining us here today. It was really, really nice. And I know it was really technical, lots of information here and different slides, but I hope it was easy to understand. I also wonder if people can add their questions, if it's possible at all.
Let everybody send messages. I think I'm gonna put it on right now.
Yeah. So if the Q&A bit is not working for you, we have just opened up the chat. Yeah. So you can please put your questions into the chat. All right, so we have a nice question. So what does Proba quantify? Field emissions or the fertilizer production ones?
Both. Yeah, that's a very good question. So we quantify both. So it depends a bit on the technology, but we have been developing a methodology, a quantification methodology for production emissions, so emissions that happen during the manufacturing of the fertilizer, and we are working on a few of the we call it methodologies, protocols that can quantify the impact. For instance, if you would use inhibitor in certain environmental contexts and farmer contexts. So both, and these would result in emission reduction quantifications on the field. So both.
Nice. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I also think this is a really nice question up for grabs. So where do you start first, assuming that you should not start with the most expensive action first? So I think this might be for
Benjamin.
For Benjamin.
Yeah. It's a very good question. I think what the objective first is to make the diagnosis of what are the best levels for each specific company, each specific crop, because it can get complex because it depends on soil fertilization, depends on soil condition, crop requirements, etc., etc. So you first need to make a diagnosis to understand what are the levels that can work, what can be their impact, and then what does it cost. And on this basis, you can have a short list of levels, and you can rank them by going first to the quickest win, so the less costly with the highest impact. And then it will depend on the profile of each company, and it can vary a lot, but you can see really this as a toolkit. So you have different tools, and then depending on the specific challenges that you face, you will choose the right tool that will help you. And then it's most of them are complementary. So then you can go to tool 2, tool number 3, and implement it like that. But I think it's important to start with a diagnosis to understand where are the stakes for you and what are the best levers that can be used to help you achieve the ambition and the decarbonization targets that you have.
Thank you, Benjamin.
Can I just add to that? Maybe I would recommend to have a look at the regenerative agriculture framework from SBTi platform. There is a new version just published, and it just gives an idea of like how to think about farm and field level outcomes, and sort of what interventions are possible. And fertilizer, both in terms of production and field use, are one of the sort of themes. There are multiple outcomes, both climate, but also soil health and economics. So yeah, I would recommend looking at that.
Yeah, thank you. We also have a pretty...
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, we have a pretty good question about how can investors stimulate companies in the value chain to participate in this technology?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And if I may, Erna, there's also another question that I've been talking a lot about the elephants and obstacles and the barriers, but a similar related question is, okay, what are the enablers maybe? So it's also a bit related to the question about investing. I think what enables, the transition would be, we call it the demand signal. So participants in the value chain, and those are both food companies, maybe a bit more downstream, but also investors who are investing in, I would say, new technologies, new projects. I would say aiming to introduce these technologies. If they send the demand signal that they are willing to, I would say, invest, willing to pay for these, I would say, improved commodities. So low carbon commodities, or willing to invest into technologies that would unlock, I would say, a low carbon, I would say, future in certain supply chains. I think that those two signals would unlock, I would say, investments from project developers, who then will go and start actual projects in real life, both at farmer level, but also maybe introducing, I would say, new production facilities and new production technologies in order to decarbonize the footprint of fertilizers. So I think answering those two questions, sending the demand signal and willing to sign, I would say, actual offtake agreements of future benefits would help the market tremendously at the moment.
Thank you. I also,
Can I just...
Yeah, of course.
Because and if you mean an investor in the sense of a shareholder investor, then that investor would need to expand the sort of the time frame for which, or how they assess profitability of the company, and look at the climate risks and also financial risks related to the corporate license to operate in, let's say, 5 to 10 years, because that might look different than one fiscal year.
Yeah. I also saw a pretty interesting question for you, Nicole, about insetting. Does insetting mean that a physical traceability of the low carbon fertilizer use is needed across the whole value chain?
That's a great question. So there is, because this is a voluntary space, so there is not a single answer. We are advocating for an approach that there is some traceability ensured, but we're talking about, let's say, sourcing or production region or landscape unit. So not necessarily all the way up and down, but to sort of the intermediate level, knowing that traceability in some contexts, especially in the usage of fertilizers, is difficult. And then, of course, the production side as well. But there we are talking about things like the sectoral approach. And in that respect, I could encourage to look at what the AIM platform is doing, AIM. They focus more on the sort of the production of fuel and sort of fertilizers as well, I think.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I just also kind of want to mention to the audience that I see there's a lot of really nice questions, and we have a couple more minutes, but some people have put them down anonymously. Some of them with the names we'd love to follow up with post this webinar. So maybe, did we answer?
Yeah, so maybe one question I think, and we see a lot, and is maybe related again to the money. And so do you see differentiation? And Benjamin, maybe you can, I would say, differ here, but how do you see differentiation in the demand for different crop types? I think what we see is that the cash crops, so coffee and cacao, that there is a lot more appetite to, I would say, because they're, I would say, valued more, you could say, to start decarbonizing there, I would say, to begin with, and maybe a bit less so in rice and soy, and I would say the more, I would say, yeah. So that's the difference that we see, but I'm not sure if you have the same view on this.
Exactly, and if we look at the fertilizer industry, it's the similar, I would say, pattern for all innovation. If there is an innovation that is a bit costly, the adoption is much faster in cash crops that have the ability to absorb more easily, I would say, the increasing cost. Because if you take, for instance, some cash crops in Europe, like fruits, for instance, the share of fertilizers in the cost structure will be much lower, so probably around 2 or 3%. But if you compare it with wheat, it will be 15 to 20%. So of course, any increase in the cost will be much more impactful for a wheat farmer than for a cash crop farmer. So this is it will probably follow the same pattern. But then, if we look at the France or Europe, if you want scale, you will have to find a way to crack the solution for broadacre crops, for wheat, for barley. And we are seeing typically in the beer industry that we've worked a bit into, that there are already some initiatives, but it's also the case for wheat. There are already some initiatives that are being implemented. So I think we have a good hope that it can accelerate and be adopted fast also for other crops. But of course, the economics make it much easier to be adopted for certain crops than others.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your answer, Benjamin. I think to be respectful of everybody's time and day, we will end the webinar here. I know there's a couple of questions laying around, but since everyone has come here registered, we will send the recordings and the slides to you then. I strongly encourage you to ask us any questions that you might have had, you felt that were unanswered, or things that come up afterwards. And also, if any of the content here has resonated with you, we encourage you to reach out and we'll start a conversation. We will also include Benjamin and Nicole's contact details if you saw something worthwhile here. And on that note, I'd like to say thank you again for anyone joining. I have taken some screenshots of questions laying around with people's names. we'll try to follow up on these. So thank you again, and have a great day. Thanks for joining. Thanks, Nicole. Thanks, Benjamin. Thanks.
Thank you for inviting me. Thanks a lot. It was great.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.